The Truther Girls. The Truther Girls.
Hi everyone. Well, usually the way that you end up with a ghost town is that an industry sets up shop somewhere. People move to the town because there's work there, there's money to be made. And then when the industry, such as a mine or whatever, peters out, everybody moves away, leaving behind a ghost town. You don't usually build a town without inhabitants and then wait for people to move in. But this is exactly what the Chinese have been doing, building these mega cities, which are ghost cities. Like any well-planned city, they have all the necessary infrastructure and amenities. The only thing they're missing are inhabitants. The official reason that these cities are there is that there are these Chinese developers who have all this money, and rather than just sock it away somewhere or sit on it, they'd rather invest it in real estate. So they build up these cities in the hopes that one day their investments will pay off. But something doesn't make sense here to me, because the real estate itself has no value unless people would want to live there or use it. And if there's no industry, no commerce, nothing, then why would anyone want to move there? And they haven't only been doing this in China, they've also been doing this in Africa. They built Nova Cidade de Calamba, very nice and well planned, and standing completely empty. So why are they building these cities not only in China but in Africa? Well, maybe it has something to do with this. What former president of the World Bank, James Wolfensohn, said during this lecture when he addressed Stanford Graduate School of Business students. And what he basically said was that there was a big shift coming where North America will no longer be the global economic leader. This role will be taken over by Asian countries such as China and India. They'll have a lot of economic growth, a big increase in the median income and in their middle class, while meanwhile things will kind of go down on this side of the world. And he also talked about Africa, that also they would experience growth and an increase in income. So maybe these Chinese developers know that down the road all these industries will be shifting over there, and that there will be a need for cities, and that people will move into these pre-built cities. Well, that's one possibility. The other possibility is that this has something to do with Agenda 21. This program is all about, as they say, sustainable development. And part of their definition of sustainable development has to do with cities and how cities are managed. Apparently including herding people into cities and developing the cities so they don't sprawl outward but rather grow upward. Eco-fascists push Agenda 21 megacities to replace growing cities in rural areas. This article is by Suzanne Posel, and she says the globalist march toward Agenda 21 includes the demonization of population growth. That's definitely true. And our current urban cities. As if there were a correlation between social upheaval and the explosion of urbanization, the propaganda abounds, creating villains out of those who fight against eminent domain, the right to live in sprawling rural areas and retain their farmlands. I know that might sound a little bit paranoid, but I think it's actually true. Last summer, we went to some community activities in our neighborhood, and one night they were having like a kind of eco-education night, and they played this movie which was basically just really bad propaganda. And it was a film about a little town, a small town, and they were saying how this town was not good for the environment because people had to drive really far to get to the mall or to get to each other, and they wanted to make it more eco-friendly, more sustainable. Well, their solution was basically to turn this little community into a city by moving everyone from the outlying areas in, by building more high-rises and then having people move in, and just moving more superstores into the city. So then people wouldn't have to travel so much with their cars. Well, the cars are not eco-friendly, they cause a lot of pollution. So turn suburbs into cities. That would be the solution. And according to this article, world cities to expand more than twice the size of Texas by 2030. that's basically the idea that they have, is cram everyone into cities and stack them and pack them. And this is not the only place I've heard this. I've heard this from other sources as well, that the solution is to have people living in high rises where they would have like a kind of shopping mall on one area, an underground parking on another area, which they probably wouldn't use very often because they wouldn't have to go anywhere, because the office where they work would also be in the same building. So, and the gym too, so you really don't need to leave the house at all. Can you imagine how depressed people would get though? And there was also something called Plandopolis. I actually did a video about this. And again, it was about these eco-friendly cities where they were growing food on the roof and recycling their waste to make fuel. And they're traveling around these little electric cars that you don't even have to steer. It goes by computer program, so you go straight to work. And a lot of work was done online. Like the doctor doesn't visit the patients. They have a cyber conference with them. People visit their friends online instead of visiting them in person. So the picture that you get is people being crammed into cities and living more and more through cyberspace, and more stacked and packed and not having to leave their house. And like I said, I don't see how that could be good for the environment, but on top of it, it's not very good for your state of mind. I'm sure that that's very conducive to depression. You never go outside and you have no contact with the land, the natural environment. That sounds awful to me. As for living in cities and getting people to live in them, they've already made a lot of headway, because at this point, a census says 8 out of 10 Americans are now urbanites. But as for the Chinese and the African cities, they haven't been able to lure people in there. So they can't build them they can't have built them for nothing. So what are these cities there for? Well, you know, this made me think of the Soviet communists, because they did that too. They built these cities like Novosibirsk, big cities. You get your Soviet apartment block for free, and you got a job working at the munitions factory or some other kind, like nuclear energy plant or whatever. And everything is like prefabricated. But where did all these people come from? They came from the countryside. How did they end up in there? Well, they were kind of forced in, because the Soviet government actually went into these little towns and bulldozed the villages. Well, they weren't towns, they were villages. They bulldozed them, including these beautiful ancient Russian cabin homes with carvings and paint and these nice traditional homes. They just razed them and forced people to move into the city. And I found a video also called China's Ghost Cities and Malls. And in this video, at the end, they were interviewing some Chinese people who were living in downtown Beijing, and they were living in these tiny little apartments, 2 or 3 people living in basically one very small room. And they were saying that they were living there because they couldn't afford to buy a proper home in Beijing. And one of them was saying that the solution should be handed out by the government, that the government should provide them with affordable housing. And not only that, but in this film, it was also revealed that a lot of these areas where people were living in these crowded conditions were slated for demolition. So I'm thinking that down the road, they will demolish these crowded areas, and they will maybe hand out the apartments or give them at a reasonable or low price, and people will move into these Plandopolises, these Agenda 21 cities. And as for Africa, it's also possible that they will use some opportunity, which could be anything from a disaster to whatever, or the creation of some industry that offers jobs, anything really. They would create some opportunity to move people into those cities, and down the road, that would be exactly what would be on the plan for Agenda 21. But I don't believe for a minute that they're just building them for no reason, because they don't know what to do with their money. So let me know what you think. Could these cities actually be for Agenda 21? And is it necessarily a bad thing, or might it actually be good for some people? So let me know what you think. and thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.